Hey there everybody, it's Nathan Cool with Surfer Magazine. Wanted to give you an update on some changes that are on the horizon as far as some storms that are coming in. Some that actually could be quite strong, some that will be bringing surf, but what's so common in springtime around the California coast is obviously it's also a time for winds. It's a time of waiting also as we transition into the southern hemisphere season. So I wanted to give you an update on what's kind of happening in that region as well. Also wanted to let you know that I'm starting to keep these YouTube update videos commercial free, so there's going to be no YouTube video ads that preface this or any of those pop-up ads as well. I'm going to keep those off for a while and see how that works. Instead, I am trying to promote my new book, Surf, Flood, Fire, and Mud, and so at times I will go ahead and talk a little bit about that throughout these videos. I hope you don't mind. It is something that helps to support me as a forecaster, a writer, and also a photographer. But in this new book, by the way, there is an update on all kinds of stuff that's happened over the last few years. Not just what brought amazing waves to Jaws, to Nazare, to the West Coast, but also some of the devastation that followed. So it's storms play-by-play. It's been a 2-year project, been hundreds of models analyzed, and a lot of data mining condensed into a story type of form to talk about not just what happened, but the science behind it. But anyways, moving on to what we have coming forward in the near term and also for the upcoming seasons, wanted to talk about the storm that could be causing some problems late next week. Also why that's still within this somewhat of a pattern shift in the Pacific, as you might have recalled from my last video update. And also what's going to be happening in the Atlantic as well, because there are some changes on the horizon as we go into the entire seasonal change across the globe. You ready to take a look at what's happening? This is what's going on right now. So we'll start out here in the Pacific with just a quick update on kind of what's going on and how this is going to be affecting some of the surf and weather to come. We can see here what looks like, once again, if you're not familiar with these relative vorticity charts, blue is high pressure, red is low pressure. And we can see that a storm is starting to come down toward Southern California. It's passing through Oregon, Northern California. And it looks like somewhat of a La Nina pattern, although that's a little bit deceiving. As we move the models forward in time, you can see how it's not really a strong area of high pressure that's dominating the Gulf. You can see more storms that are starting to line up that could come down. So here's the one that will affect us shortly. And then this is the one we're really keeping an eye on here. This is a storm that could do a couple things as far as surf and also weather late next week. And I'm going to get into that in more detail because this is a very unique storm, especially for this time of year, that it would rotate around off our coast. That's only about 1,000 miles from Southern California, about 1,200 miles or so to its center. And it sits there and spins. It moves somewhat north toward us. And you can see that La Nina pattern is all but gone, and this is very typical to that Pacific pattern shift mentioned in my last video. This would also dip far enough south to really cause a lot of issues. That's when it can really start dipping into some tropical moisture. But then it would eventually move on. You can see it would get up some backup system behind it. So this is when we start getting into the second half of next week. This would be early morning, Thursday the 22nd. And I'll talk more about the timing as that goes on. But you can see then after that storm passes, still not a big area of blocking high pressure. So things aren't looking too bad on the surf horizon for the long range, as long as we can get storms out of the western Pacific. But we are heading into spring, and it is a time of seasonal change. So when we take a look at what's happening with the surf, these are this is the wave analysis model by FN Mach. It's a very good example of what we can expect in the way of surf. You can see that some wind swell is starting to head down the coast as we talk today. That does progress. A little bit of it makes it down to Southern California, but watch as that next storm approaches. You can see it building now here in the Gulf, okay, in the southern reaches, and that's at a very low latitude as it then sits and spins for a while. And it does kick up a fairly good sized fetch at one point, and then keeps spinning around, and then there's expected to be some reform, and this is where it gets real interesting. Now this would be about Thursday time frame. Swell would start to be filling in, but then as it really strengthens, then more of that could traverse farther south into Southern California Friday the 23rd and then also on the 24th. Now, models were showing yesterday that this would have been a much more powerful system with a lot more powerful reform. Take a look at the nav gem. Now this is going to be a little bit harder to see because they throw a lot of arrows in there to show the mean wave direction. Anyways, as we move that forward in time, we can see something similar that also happens with that very similar reform, but they actually show on this model run that it would have stronger seas, and those are seas that are in the 30 to 35 foot range, which would only be about 1,000 miles from Southern California, which would result in much bigger surf than by Saturday the 24th. Got to keep an eye on that. This is a very extended long range model. If we take a look though at the storm portion of this, and this is where it gets a little bit scary. We do have for today's storm a little bit of stuff starting to go through, and we can see that here. This is relative humidity, by the way, at about a mile above sea level. This is at what's 850 millibars. So that's about 1 mile, about 5,000 feet above sea level. So we can see in centigrade here the temperature also up there, and that blue lines mean it's freezing, red lines are warmer. We can see that there's fairly cool temperatures in the atmosphere above us, freezing line above it, and we've also got some moisture then in the atmosphere for this low pressure system as it dives south to work with, but not a lot. It really starts fading through, but cold air does descend south. Notice that freezing line. So we've got some cooler temperatures heading into our way this weekend, but then things will clear out. You can see how the humidity breaks apart. As that next storm though approaches, this is where it gets even more tricky. We've got some strong dynamics that start to form with this, and if you notice, this is what's known as an atmospheric river pattern. This is where that circulating low pressure is tapping into tropical moisture around Hawaii, and you can see it brings in a tail of it, and it's just like a fork sitting on a plate of pasta just spinning that in. So as that atmospheric river storm starts to bring in more tropical moisture, it is expected to not just make a landfall around Southern California, but also some strong dynamics. Look at the freezing line up here, the blue lines here, but look here, we've got 3 degrees Celsius, 6 degrees Celsius, and just really close to it on the other side of it is 15 and 18 degrees Celsius. That's a very strong temperature gradient. There's some very strong winds associated with that, and a very strong jet stream also will help that, which I'll show in just a second. But anyways, that atmospheric river storm, after it once dissipates, is expected to reach out to Hawaii again and bring in additional moisture, and this is when rain could then get real heavy on Friday, and you can see the dynamics look very strong, very tight gradients in the temperature as it comes in along that path with freezing temperatures right above it. This could be a typical springtime storm where we're right between cold and warm seasons, and that could also then bring in hail. So, and other types of conditions. We can take a look at how that looks on the satellite right now if you're interested. And if we move these satellite pictures forward in time from NOAA, we can see that this low pressure system, excuse me, I'm actually going the wrong direction here. So we move that forward in time, and we can see that that low pressure system here, it's starting to come down. There's not a lot of moisture associated with it. You can see it's very sparse. Here's that tropical plume farther south of it. And that's why today we're not really expecting much out of the storm heading into our area. But if you look out here though, this tropical moisture plume is very rich that the other system could tap into as it dives south. And that's what this is doing right here. This is that low pressure system up here near the Aleutians. It's going to be diving south fairly shortly. So that's what we're up against. When we look though at what the rain could do, and this is a rain model that shows a 6-hour accumulation, as we move those forward in time for today into Saturday, not really a whole lot. When you look at Southern California, even Central California, that's only measuring about a trace to 1/10 of an inch. So these are very light rain amounts, not really a whole lot, and it moves out of the area then. This would be Saturday morning. A little bit then could come through on Saturday afternoon, so still not out of the woods completely yet until we get closer to around Sunday time frame. This is 4 a.m. on Sunday. But watch what's happening offshore as we start enjoying clear weather with high pressure over top of us in southern and also central California. That next storm approaches the region, and as it does, it swirls into that moisture, and you can see heavy precipitation could start hitting Santa Barbara. This would be Wednesday afternoon, 4 o'clock Wednesday afternoon, and that blue in there, that signifies about 3/4 to 1.5 inches of rain over a 6-hour period. That brings in some high rain rates potential to those burn areas from the Thomas Fire around Montecito, so got to be careful on that. Then rain progresses south throughout the night on Wednesday into Thursday morning, and pretty heavy rain for a lot of Southern California. Not enough to get us really out of the drought that we're in, starting to enter in anyways, but it could bring us a potential of 1/4 to 1/2 inch of rain for most areas, and potentially more after that. And then of course weather would clear soon after. So we are still in a La Nina state though, even though it doesn't look like it too much when we look at the weather and wave models, because we are heading out of winter, so we don't really see those teleconnections that much where we would see that dominant area of high pressure that would sit up here. But you can see by the sea surface temperatures, it's very cold still across the eastern equatorial Pacific. And it looks like it'll probably stay that way for a while yet longer. In fact, if we take a look at this model here, and this is actually then the forecast for what to expect out of La Nina. It's still not a big change from my last video where it looks like we'll stay in a slight La Nina to possibly a neutral ENSO, which couldn't be that bad. I mean, if we stay in a neutral type winter, then when we get into 2018 to 2019, then we could get a fair amount of rainfall. But models were a little bit more bullish with this to pull us out toward a more El Nino type of neutral state, where now the models are trending into more La Nina type of neutral state. So we got to see how that progresses over the near term. And sorry for jumping ahead earlier. This is the model that I wanted to show next, and this is the southern hemisphere and looking at the WAMs. Now, we can watch what's happening there, and we're starting to see a lot of activity that's starting to form in the Southern Ocean. And here we are coming out of the Indian Ocean into the Southern Ocean below Australia, some very strong storms, but then something bad happens. As soon as they get toward New Zealand, then they start diving south and just get blown to bits. And the reason for that is because the way that the pattern is right now with the jet stream. Now, it's not that the jet stream is so strong, but we have a very large dominant area of high pressure that's been forming down in this region. You can see that blue. So that's really disrupting the jet stream. If it wasn't for that, then this strong storm would have more of a chance to drift northward once it got toward New Zealand. So hopefully that will change over time. As you can see, moving the models forward in time, it did want to move off to the east, that high pressure system, but it wasn't enough to really save the day and send enough storm activity north to really send us remarkable swell towards Southern California that would have arrived in this case around the 25th, 26th of March. But we got to see how that progresses. This is still based on the long range outlook. So there always is hope. Looking toward the Atlantic, the big thing that we want to see right now are two things. Obviously, we've got this nor'easter. This is what's happening up here off the East Coast. There's really not much in the way of surf, though, for the East Coast itself. But when we talk about Nazare, what we want to see, and this is something that I mentioned in my new book, Surf, Flood, Fire, and Mud. When I talk about Nazare, I talk about the North Atlantic Oscillation. And all that really is we want a low pressure, this low pressure area up here near Iceland to interact with this high pressure area down here known as the Bermuda Azores High. Now, when there's a tight gradient between them, we get a lot of storm activity. So watch what happens here. It's okay. There's somewhat of a gradient. You can see by the lines here, those tight lines. But it does get tighter over time as we move those models forward because we've got a lot of activity that's starting to come down from, especially here, when we start getting that strong Icelandic low up here. So even though the NAO would, in relationship to these systems, be kind of lackluster and even get blocked at one point like our Pacific did here over the last few months, we'd eventually start seeing the NAO go positive more toward an influence of sending some bigger surf like this particular storm to Portugal, to Europe, and of course then be able to bring in some bigger surf to Nazare. So that's definitely some potential. When we take a look at that, we did see, and this is something I mentioned in the book as well, a lot of positive NAO activity around 2015 to 2016. We've had some recently too, and right now we are pulling out somewhat of a positive NAO, but it's starting to rise once again, just like models were predicting, and that's what these little lines are here. So there's still potential for Nazare to go off in the coming weeks and possibly the next couple months, but then of course winter will be dying down in that region as well across the entire northern hemisphere, so those bigger swells look to be coming to an end sometime soon. And then for Southern California and for the East Coast as well, we're looking at summertime surf, but it's a matter of if we stay in this La Nina state that we've been in, then we also have the possibility of not seeing a whole lot of hurricane activity in the for California. We can, though, for the East Coast, you can see there's a lot of warm water that's in that region. Also, La Nina means that we have a better chance of seeing hurricane activity in the Atlantic, so that has to be watched very closely, especially with the Gulf being on fire still, even in the middle of winter, being very warm in that region. But as far as California is concerned, all eyes are on the southern hemisphere, as that will probably bring more to our region than it would as far as hurricane activity that would start spinning up over the next couple months. So that's how things are looking right now. Some of this I explained throughout the book as well, on the differences between what we talk about in seasons from El Nino, and also why that unfolded for various things throughout the entire planet, actually. Things that happened with Hurricane Harvey and with Maria, and also what happened in Jaws, what happened in Nazare, what happened in Mavericks. But when we're taking a look at the near term here for California, we are looking at some light rain that we'll be moving through later today. But the biggest concern right now is a major, potentially major storm that could move through Wednesday through Friday of next week, and that could bring a lot of flooding rain to around the Santa Barbara County region, also to the central coast. The burn areas around the Thomas Fire burn region needs to be watched very closely for what could happen there. It doesn't look like it's going to be enough rain to pull us either way out of where we are as far as the rain totals. We're very low right now. Santa Barbara so far has had about 6 or 7 inches. They need about 15 at least to actually be at a normal year. So when we take a look at the surf, though, obviously some surf is probably going to come out of this. If it doesn't come ashore and bring a lot of rain, then we could see a lot of surf probably preceding at least the rain event. So got to see if that also happens, where we get some larger surf during the second half of next week. That conditions could be questionable. We've got to see how that actually unfolds, though, in the near term. After that, we are going into a seasonal change. We are looking at probably a bit of a calm down in the North Pacific. The North Atlantic still has some potential to bring some big wave events to Nazare, but those are starting to fade as well, even though we would be going into the bigger wave, the season, with that NAO being very positive. So we got to see how that plays out over the next few weeks, but eventually anyways, in the next few months, that'll probably be dying down quite a bit. As we start approaching then into the spring and summer, things are still pretty much on track from my last video, where since we're staying in somewhat of a La Nina, then the east coast of the U.S. could still see a lot of hurricane activity this summer. El Nino blows the tops off of hurricanes because of the jet stream's placement and vertical shear. But when we're talking about then the La Nina coming into play, then hurricanes have a lot better chance to form, and water temperatures are above normal already in the East Coast region, and especially the Gulf of Mexico. As we look toward, though, California and the potential then for spring and summer surf, looks like it's going to be on the southern hemisphere, completely reliant on that, compared to almost very little activity probably from hurricanes because of the cooler waters down in the equatorial region. Even though they are somewhat warmer around California, storms probably still won't have that much of a chance to make it farther north. But when it comes to the southern hemisphere, we got to see a change in getting rid of that high pressure that's starting to dominate areas around Antarctica, especially near New Zealand, so we can get those storms coming out of the Indian Ocean into the Southern Ocean, drift northward once they get past New Zealand and start sending some swell our way. Anyways, that's how things are looking right now. If you do like this video and you want to see more of them, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. It won't cost you anything, and as soon as one of these videos is posted, you'll be the first to know. Thanks a lot for watching. Until next time, take care, be safe, and smile in the lineup.